guess being famous isn't always,
It's not all it's chalked up to be, as they say.
Truly.
As the kids say nowadays.
Well, take it away, James.
I will. Alright, first up we have Bjork's stalker, Ricardo Lopez. This case has always gotten under my skin. It's incredibly disturbing, mainly because of the videotapes. I'm guessing most of you have heard of this case before, but for those who haven't, or just need a refresher, I'll get into it. Not that you'd ever be able to get the image of this man's last video out of your mind. Alright, Lopez was an unemployed man living in Florida who became infatuated with the Icelandic singer Bjork. Got to the point where he actually began to believe that he was in a romantic relationship with her, despite never having met her in person. Eventually, he came to the conclusion that the only way they were going to be together, though, was in heaven. He decided he was going to need to kill Bjork along with himself. He recorded his intentions and thoughts in a series of videotapes which just got increasingly more disturbing as they went along. Lopez constructed a homemade explosive which he intended to mail to Bjork's home. In September of '96, he sent the package and recorded his final video, which culminated in him taking his own life with a firearm. Fortunately, the acid bomb was intercepted by authorities before it reached Bjork's home.
Back in 2016, Miranda Cosgrove experienced a harrowing ordeal that remains etched in her memory. In a detailed recount quite recently, after watching the hit Netflix show Baby Reindeer, Cosgrove opened up about that fateful day which began like any other. However, it took a nightmarish turn when she received a late-night call informing her that something terrible had happened at her house. On that day in Los Angeles, after deciding not to return to her own home following a bad date, Cosgrove opted to stay at her parents' house instead. It was there she learned that the man who had been stalking her lit himself on fire in her yard, ultimately ending his own life. The scene she described was surreal, with caution tape surrounding her front yard marking the spot of the tragic event. She later discovered that this individual had been secretly burying items in her backyard days before his death. Among the buried objects were a lunchbox containing milk chocolate, along with a blade, a rope, and other random items. Cosgrove hadn't noticed any unusual activity at the time, but security footage later revealed the stalker pacing her yard with a loaded weapon. The climax of the stalking came when another woman, driving a car similar to Cosgrove's, drove by the house. Mistaking her for Cosgrove, the stalker opened fire, missing the woman as she quickly drove away. This mistaken identity likely prevented a direct confrontation with Cosgrove herself, which might have actually saved Miranda's life at the end of the day. This terrifying event has left a mark on Miranda, making her hesitant to spend time alone in the house where it all happened.
Next, we have the case of Robert John Bardo. In 1989, Robert Bardo, a man from Arizona, developed an unhealthy fixation on actress Rebecca Schaeffer after watching her on the television show My Sister Sam. He began stalking Schaeffer and tried to make contact by sending her letters. He even showed up at the Warner Bros. Studio lot where she worked. Now, horrifyingly, this guy was able to get her address when he went to a private detective agency, stating he was a friend of hers and needed her current address to send her a gift. On July 18th, 1989, Bardo showed up at her apartment and rang her doorbell. She answered, and Bardo began berating her about how she'd lost her innocence after having appeared in an adult scene in one of her latest movies. Schaeffer managed to turn him away, but after having breakfast at a local diner, he returned to her apartment, and this time, when she answered, he took her life with a firearm. He was arrested and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
On the chilly night of December 30th, 1999, the serenity of George Harrison's Friar Park mansion was shattered, marking a night that nearly saw him become the second Beatle to have their life taken. George and his wife Olivia had just retired to bed when they heard the sound of breaking glass. An intruder had broken into their home. Reacting quickly, Olivia woke George, who decided to investigate the source of the disturbance while she called for emergency services. As George tried to find out what was happening, the air filled with the smell of cigarette smoke, which led him to a startling scene. In the hallway, a man wielding a stone sword from a damaged statue and a kitchen knife confronted him. A violent struggle ensued where George tried to disarm the assailant, but the altercation escalated rapidly as the intruder, gaining the upper hand, began harming George repeatedly, leaving him to think that he was about to have his life taken inside of his own home. The incident, which is chillingly reminiscent of John Lennon's assassination in 1980 highlights the dark side of fan adoration, where love can tragically turn into violent hatred. Miraculously, it was Olivia's quick thinking and fierce protectiveness that saved George. Armed with nothing but a brass poker and later a heavy lamp base, she fought off the attacker. Despite sustaining injuries herself, her courageous actions bought crucial time until the police arrived. The couple survived, but the scars of that night lingered both physically and psychologically.
On March 30th, 1981, as President Ronald Reagan exited the Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C., he was fired at by a man named John Hinckley Jr. The man's reason for attempting to kill the president? Well, he was obsessed with the actress Jodie Foster. You know, that explains that. Easy to see how those dots connect, except not at all, unless you're as messed up in the head as this guy was. Hinckley Jr. seemed to believe that if he killed the president, it would impress Jodie Foster so much that she would reciprocate his romantic interest, and the two would fall in love and live happily ever after. Something he'd obviously concocted entirely in his own head. Now, he wrote a letter to Foster right before the attack, saying, "Over the past 7 months, I've left you dozens of poems, letters, and love messages in the faint hope that you could develop an interest in me. Although we talked on the phone a couple times, I never had the nerve to simply approach you and introduce myself. The reason I'm going ahead with this attempt now is because I cannot wait any longer to impress you." He ended up spending decades in a mental institution before being released in 2016.
Sandra Bullock's encounter with a stalker reads like a scene straight out of a Hollywood thriller, but for her, it was unfortunately terrifyingly real. On June 8, 2014, in the dead of the night, the acclaimed actor was jolted awake by loud banging noises and soon spotted a man in dark attire prowling through her home. In a state of panic, she secured herself in a closet with a safe door and dialed 911. The fear in her voice during the call was stark, as she described seeing the intruder ascending towards her attic.
My closet has a safe door in my bedroom, and I've locked it, and I've locked in the closet right now. I hear someone banging on the door.
The intruder was identified as Joshua Corbett, a man whose obsession with Bullock had driven him to break into her home. When police apprehended him inside her residence, they discovered he was carrying letters that detailed disturbing fantasies about the actor. A subsequent search of Corbett's home unearthed a chilling collection of weapons, hinting at even darker possibilities. Legal proceedings against Corbett were very complex. Initially stalled due to concerns about his mental health, the case saw Corbett ordered to reside in a mental health facility as a part of his bail conditions. However, this twisted tale reached a very grim conclusion in May 2018. At the age of 42, Corbett ended his own life during a tense standoff with a SWAT team who had come to serve a warrant at his home. This tragic end underlined the profound impacts of mental illness and marked a very somber close to a chapter that no doubt left its mark on Sandra.
This next stalker went after Madonna in the 90s, vowing to kill her if she didn't accept his marriage proposal. Robert Dewey Hoskins was and is obsessed with Madonna. His obsession became dangerous in 1995 though, when he attempted to break into her home in Hollywood Hills. He ended up scaling the perimeter wall of her home. He was carrying a blade at the time of his arrest. Hoskins was charged with stalking and making threats against the singer, and during the trial, Madonna testified about all this fear and anxiety she experienced at Hoskins' repeated attempts to contact her and invade her privacy. She described how Hoskins left threatening messages at her home and had actually tried to enter her residence on more than one occasion. Hoskins was ultimately convicted of stalking and threatening Madonna. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but was later transferred to a psychiatric hospital, a hospital he would later escape from in 2012, just 3 days after Madonna had announced her next tour. Luckily, he was arrested again in Long Beach.
Well-known musician Lily Allen endured years of harrowing experiences after she became the focus of a relentless stalker. For 7 long years, her life was overshadowed by menacing tweets, letters loaded with threats and disturbing messages that found their way not only to her home, but also to her record company, her manager's office, and even her sister's shop. The situation reached its terrifying climax when her stalker, identified as Alex Gray from Perth, Scotland, broke into her bedroom with a sinister plan to harm her. It was in the early hours when the ominous sounds of banging on the wall woke her up from her sleep. Her heart raced as she watched the door handle twist ominously before a man burst in. In a moment of sheer terror, he tore away her duvet and hurled insults while he claimed he was searching for his father. Lily faced the intruder, who she suspected was armed with a blade that was concealed in his jacket. This frightening encounter ended when a friend who was staying with Lily managed to get the intruder out of the room, allowing Lily to run to the next room to make sure that her sleeping children were okay, which thankfully they were completely unharmed. In some of her own words, the incident left Lily feeling like a recluse, distrustful, and constantly wary.
This next one is pretty nuts, because this stalker actually lived on his victim's property for an entire week. Had a hobby of stalking Jennifer Lopez. Lopez had even been forced to file a restraining order on him, but that didn't stop him from accomplishing what he did next. In August of 2013, he managed to break into the pool house of her mansion in Southampton, and he was there for the whole week without anyone noticing. And not only that, but he took pictures all over the property and posted them on Facebook, acting like he belonged there. He took selfies, he posted pictures of receipts just to prove he was in her area. He was just blatantly incriminating himself. Thankfully, Lopez hadn't been home that week. He was caught and charged with burglary, criminal contempt, and stalking.
In the whirlwind of pop stardom, Harry Styles, the charming Grammy-winning singer, has had his share of alarming encounters with not one but two overzealous fans turning into stalkers in recent times. Starting with the more recent of the two, just in April of this year, a 35-year-old woman who was stalking Harry, Myra Carvalho, originally from Brazil but living in a London hostel since December, found herself sentenced to 14 weeks behind bars. The UK's courts also handed down a decade-long prohibition against her contacting Styles or attending any of his performances. Carvalho had pleaded guilty earlier in the week to stalking that caused significant alarm or distress. Her intense fandom had driven her to send a staggering 8,000 cards filled with handwritten letters, some even hand-delivered to Styles' doorstep in London. But this wasn't Harry's first eerie dance with unwanted attention. Take it back to 2019 when another fan, 26-year-old Pablo Tarzaga Orrero, crossed the line from fervent follower to fear-inducing presence. Pablo's tactics included camping outside Styles' home for 2 months, sending notes and even money, and attempting to physically grab Harry while he was on a casual run in the park. This series of unsettling events followed an incident where Styles, in a moment of kindness, had offered Pablo food, having noticed him sleeping at a bus stop. Despite Pablo's denial of the charges, claiming an entirely different narrative involving Styles, the court ruled in favor of the singer, leading to a restraining order against Pablo.
Well, I'm not going to be stalking anyone anytime soon after this.
I hope not.
Peace.
This is what really did it in for you?
Yeah, just the fact that, it seems like a creepy thing to do.
Alright guys, I've been one of your hosts today, Olivia Kozlowski.
I've been your host, James.
Bye.